Chris Redfield is gone from Resident Evil 9, and Capcom teased a mysterious new mechanic that could completely change the series. Let's break it down. Recently, producer Masato Kumazawa and game director Koshi Nakanishi spoke to gaming outlets about their new title, Resident Evil Requiem. One of the first things they revealed is that Chris is nowhere to be found in RE9. As everyone knows, Chris appears in almost every mainline game, which is tragic because there are so many Resident Evil characters who have been left in the dark for way too long. Of course, we haven't had a game with Jill Valentine, for example, since 2012, not counting the remake of the third game, of course. So not having Chris in Requiem is honestly something I'm kind of glad about. It's time to give someone else their time to shine. Although in this case, I'm almost certain that someone is going to be Leon. I don't think we're gonna get Jill anytime soon, guys. They also commented on how the story rarely ever picks up after the last cliffhanger, which pretty much confirms that the BSAA clones plotline isn't going anywhere. Is anyone surprised? Regarding Raccoon City, Nakanishi said that they're trying to make it feel believable to how it would look like after the nukes. They gave some real thought about how the explosion would realistically change the landscape of the city, which is a level of detail that I very much appreciate, and I can only imagine how nostalgic and shocking it will be to revisit these areas with this new look. They also confirmed that the monster chasing Grace, let's call her Big Mama,
selling narcotica. How much do it cost, bitch? None zip nada.
Isn't Lisa Trevor. Yes, they used her screams in the demo, but only as placeholders. The real monster is actually society. In reality, I suspect that this is actually Grace's mother, Alyssa. Similar to RE2, Alyssa is probably trying to find her daughter, as the virus requires her to consume or infect someone with the same blood. That would also explain why they are examining Grace's blood at the beginning. Another thing that points to this is that Grace's death animation appears to be very much reminiscent of Goya's painting Saturn devouring his son. This work of art from the 19th century depicts Saturn, or Kronos, devouring his children, as it's known in Greek mythology. If this ends up being the case, the storyline this time around might actually be darker than usual, and for a game trying to achieve a more impactful horror experience, this might be the way to go. I also want to mention that the concept of a mother trying to kill her daughter is endlessly terrifying to me. Of course, our mothers are supposed to be our guardians, and flipping this notion on its head gives me the chills. It also kind of reminds me of films like The Babadook or Hereditary. This is funny because in one of my previous videos, I stated that if Capcom made a Resident Evil game influenced by something like Hereditary, I would trust them 100% to make a good game. So if this ends up being the case, I might have been right on the money here. But what about the gameplay itself? Based on the demo we've seen, Grace appears to not use any weapons this time around. But fear not, the developers have assured players that this is only the case for the beginning of the game. Like in games prior, Grace Ashcroft is going to go through a hero's journey, and she will eventually fight back. She will face her fears in a way that will make the action feel even more satisfying by the end. Nakanishi compared Requiem's gameplay to Resident Evil 7 or the remake of the second game. Basically, it's going to be a lot more horror-focused, but it's going to give the player a very satisfying balance between being scared and feeling release via puzzle-solving, exploration, and a satisfying combat system. Personally, I think this is how Resident Evil works best, and I'm glad to hear that they are using those two games, which are two of my favorite, as inspirations for 9. Nakanishi stated that he wants the horror sequences to be extremely terrifying and the action sequences to be very exciting. He wants to create a large divide between the two, making the game feel like a roller coaster. He also mentioned that the game has a special mechanic that we haven't seen before, which would allow them to achieve this. I'm not quite sure how this will exactly play out. I think Resident Evil usually succeeds in achieving a good balance, and trying to balance between extremes seems like a very tricky thing to do. I think the closest we've got to this is probably Resident Evil 4. That game feels like a roller coaster with high-octane action sequences in one area and terrifying encounters in the next. I'm pretty sure this is what Capcom wants to achieve with Requiem, and I do wonder if they will be successful this time around. About the mysterious system they mention, I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but I want to be clear with you that what I'm about to say is pure speculation on my part. I think the game will allow us to switch between Grace and a familiar character. Let's say, for the sake of this scenario, Leon. With Grace, we will go through a horrific journey as she slowly becomes a stronger character. With Leon though, we'll probably just kick zombies in the face. I might be wrong, and really who knows other than the developers themselves, but I'm almost sure this is the mysterious mechanic they are hinting here. This would also make a lot of sense since Jeff Keighley himself told the audience during the announcement of the game that the game was also going to feature cinematic action. So we are probably going to get horror gameplay with Grace and the cinematic action with Leon. An interesting thing they also mentioned is regarding the different perspectives. Nakanishi said that Resident Evil 7 was too scary for a lot of people. That game was in first person because at the time they wanted to make a game purely focused on horror. He now thinks they might have overdone it, which I disagree, but whatever. And so giving the player the option to play in third person might be the ideal solution to this issue. I think this is way preferable to simply making the game less scary and with more action elements like they did with Village. I'm totally fine with trying to cater to a large audience as long as they don't sacrifice what makes their games compelling in the first place, and I think this might be a healthy middle ground. They also confirmed that Grace will sometimes trip while running away from Big Mama, as long as you are playing in third person, which very much reminds me of another Capcom game called Hunting Ground. If you don't know, in that game you have very limited ways to defend yourself. Most of the time you will simply run for your life or hide from stalker type enemies, but if the main character is too afraid, she will trip while running away. This makes the game feel more frightening as the player will lose control of the character's movements as the fear ramps up. They basically want the player to feel immersed when playing in first person, while empathizing with the character when playing in third person. So we pretty much get the best of both worlds in one game. I also noticed that there is this theme of duality going on here. Capcom might be treading dangerous ground in trying to please everyone, but thankfully I think they're righting the wrongs they did with RE6. In that game we had 4 campaigns and the game felt bloated with a lack of any kind of focus. In RE9, however, I feel that Capcom is revisiting that idea of making a Resident Evil for everyone, but this time within their actual fanbase. Instead of trying to get that Call of Duty audience, they are trying to merge their own 2 sub-series of games, the first-person horror entries and the latest remakes, in one ultimate package. It sounds risky, but after RE7, I have complete faith in this team to find their next golden formula, and it makes me very happy that they're actually trying something new. But that's everything we know so far, but as soon as more updates drop, I'll cover it here. What do you think about Chris being absent from the game? And who do you think Big Mama actually is? Stick around and I'll see you next time. Just a quick note. If you like my work and want to support me, you can do so on Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the description.